and welcome back to the Backside Groundballs podcast. Super excited to be back here on the pod. My name is Trevor Powers, and I am joined by my co-host Dan Galati. Dan, we thought the off season was going to be, let's have a fun conversation about this. Let's rank coaches in the country. Let's rank jobs. Let's predict the next 3 years of college baseball and who the top programs are going to be. Well, we actually have groundbreaking news in college baseball, but before we get into that and we get into the details of that, Dan, how was your weekend been so far? We're on Sunday morning here, so good day to kind of get on here and talk college baseball.
Doing good. Good weekend. I think this is both of ours preferred recording time.
Yeah.
We would like to do this all the time. Nothing better than early Sunday morning, getting up, having a conversation. Nice to see you back in the host chair after I cameoed for a couple episodes there, but happy to be back on the pod. And yeah, I think what I was thinking about before we got on this morning is we talk about having to fill the off season a little bit. There's no games being played. I just can't believe that school starts next week. Now I know we have a long time before baseball, or not next week, sorry, next month. Yeah. We have a long time till baseball season starts, but it's those fall ball is going to be kicking up here in 4 weeks, which is kind of crazy to think about that it's already. I feel like we were just talking about Omaha.
Yeah, I'm surprised you haven't had your middle of the night wake up call of oh my gosh, I didn't plan practice yet for the fall yet. Has that come in yet, or are we still waiting on that one?
We've been out long enough now. I think those days are over. I think we've been out. It definitely happened the last couple of years, especially the year one. The first year was wait, what? Oh no, we're good. We're good. We don't have to do that anymore. But yeah, I think I've moved on past that part of my life, and now I know that it's more oh, we need to record this week. Wake up in the middle of the night of what are we going to talk about? Or
yeah, what are we going to talk about? College
when
baseball.
Are we supposed to go to
August.
this school? That's truly more what it's like. It's trying to keep the schedule straight in my head.
Last night had me up thinking about that, but we don't need to talk about that because that's a fun problem to have. Let's just put it that way when you have to hop on a plane and fly across the country to go hang out with cool college baseball coaches. So we're super excited about that. But Dan, let's talk about the House legislation that just went through and passed cross college sports. This was groundbreaking. Obviously, you and I are huge college football fans, so there's definitely an impact on that side of the sport, pushing the scholarships from 105 to 85. And you might think, well, of course, football can fund that. Yeah, well, that has some implications with baseball, which we're going to obviously talk about. Baseball, it's an end of an era, right? The 11.7 era is no more. We're now going to 34 full scholarships. So when you initially hear that, we don't even need to talk in detail about, kind of the finer things, but what's your initial feel when you hear somebody say 34 full scholarships for baseball, right?
Yeah, if we're talking initial, I don't initially think about the nuances first off the bat. My first thought is this is a good thing, right? This is a positive. Now, I know that, everybody views things differently and everybody, is living in a different house. So things are different depending on where you are and who you are when it comes to stuff like this. But just for an overall health of the sport and health of college athletics, I think this is a positive on the whole. And I know my phone will blow up after this episode comes out from the people who disagree with that, and that's fine. But I just think that on the whole, when you're looking at it, this is positive. Get more kids opportunities to be there on scholarship, because a lot of these kids work to earn it. And when you're talking about college baseball programs operating at 11.7 for all these years, none of these kids were on full rides. None of them. And you think about what some of them provide to the community that they play baseball in at their college and some of these schools. And I understand that it's probably the minority that I'm talking about here. They deserve the full scholarship, and they deserve to have that opportunity to go there and have school taken care of. So I just off the bat, it's exciting because it's well, now, hey, it feels like baseball kind of isn't a poor sport at the college level, whereas in the past it's you kind of looked around and you're man, these schools, these kids, you're trying to divide 11.7 scholarships over 40 athletes. Anyone who can do that math, that's not, some of these kids aren't getting very much money to go and try and chase a dream and try and play at the next level. And so now initially, first things, it's a positive.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you talk about, player empowerment and players' rights and athletes' rights in the new age of college athletics, because, I mean, realistically, the reason the House settlement and a big piece of the settlement on the past side is that, like, athletes have been taken advantage of for years. And I'm not saying that baseball specifically, it's been more in the football and the basketball space with the big name brands that schools have marketed and made a ton of money off of selling tickets and getting boosters and revenue from that. Baseball has been the redheaded stepchild, right, of athletics, right? 11.7. And again, we could get into the legalities of why baseball is an underfunded sport. Well, there's things that need to offset. When you have football taking 85 on the men's side, you got to have something to cancel out on the women's side because of due to Title IX, and baseball just ends up getting the shaft because basketball is always going to be a funded sport because it's a revenue generator. There is the NCAA March Madness, there are ticket sales, there's more intrigue in that sport compared to baseball at the majority of the programs, right? There are going to be a minority of programs that are going to be able to shift and be able to have a budget based off of what their baseball program brings in. But the majority, the mid majors and even some Power Five programs, don't sell enough seats. They don't have enough booster interest. They don't have TV deals that bring in multi millions of dollars. So there is a little bit of a crossroads here. So that's why when we talk about 11.7 to 34, it's not just exact, right? What's going to be fascinating is what schools actually push to the 34, right? We're never going to get, I mean, you can hearsay a lot of things like that. We could probably pull some strings and find some answers out. But the reality is the majority, there are programs out there that don't give 11.7. I think that's what a lot of people don't fully understand. There are programs out there right now that do not fund 11.7 scholarships over 40 guys. And when we talk about that, like that is a fraction of the roster and the funding that's required. What schools are going to make a push for 34? Off the top of our head, LSU, Vanderbilt, right? These schools that have competed for national championship. Yes, most likely. But there's also the opposite end of it where numbers game with football going up to 105, right? Baseball going up to 34. How are we going to make this work in a Title IX landscape of balancing both ends of the spectrum out? And that's why there's some, Tracy Smith has had a ton of good tweets over the last couple of days. It's not exact of like name brand. Don't think about the name brand. Don't be surprised when Alabama baseball, which is a national championship contending program on any given year, doesn't go to 34 full scholarships, because trust me, they're funding that 105, right? And something on the men's side's got to take a hit for the 34, and it's probably going to be baseball unless they're going to add women's rowing, women's fencing, equestrian, whatever it is, because that's the reality of college athletics in today's landscape.
Yeah, and I don't think football. I mean, I think for the majority of these football programs that are named, quote unquote name brand, Power Four, Big Ten, SEC, the 20 scholarship jump is going to be taken care of, no problem.
It will.
Like I don't
100%.
even think that factors into the mathematics there. Like those extra 20 that does nothing for. I think when you look at it, it's going to be the other sports that you have to look at. Like I think that just whether it's they'll get creative football programs. I know that. I can confidently
it's just
say
more
whether
of
it's
like if when we sit down at the end of the year and map out, like, again, Title IX and the Title IX implications, and
right.
we're not Title IX lawyers, right? But basically the synopsis, the quick 5-second version is 1-to-1, right? So for every male scholarship, you have to have one female scholarship. Alabama has 17 varsity sports, from my understanding off the top of my head. Penn State has 32, right? So if we make a push when we only have 17, again, like you said, football's taken care of, right? And until football is no longer a Title IX eligible sport, which is probably coming in the near future, next 5 years, right? What's taking a hit on the men's side? Baseball, right? And somebody at Alabama is going to say, sorry, baseball program, you guys are going to have to fight for this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's going to be baseball, and it's simply going to be baseball because that's the second biggest roster.
Exactly.
And that's what makes it tough. Now, as you said, the schools that have larger athletic departments already and have a ton of female sports, which is a good thing. And like
Good thing.
Title
100%.
IX is sometimes talked about in these corners, and I'm not saying by you or me. I don't think you or I have ever spoke poorly of Title IX, but it is positive to like open opportunities, open athletics for men and women makes sense. The one-to-one thing makes a ton of sense. It's unfortunate that there aren't any women's sports that
Have
need as big
105
of rosters as
scholarships.
football. Like there isn't a
Right.
sport where
Yeah.
you need 100. I don't know if these college programs need 105 guys in
No,
general,
they
but
don't. No, they don't.
I'm who am I to say? Like the NFL does
Hmm.
it with 53 and they seem to do fine. I feel like there's a middle ground between 105 and 53, but whatever.
Well, it was
That's what makes
85.
that's what always makes the numbers tough, right? Is the fact that if you have a football program, the math now gets a
Yes.
lot harder, and that's what
Yeah.
it's kind of always been said. If you look at all these athletic departments that have football programs and you kind of just go on their page and pull down sports, you'll notice that a lot of them have more women's sports than men. Well, it's like because football counts as like 3 sports on the men's
Yeah.
side because your
Yeah.
roster is so gosh darn big and you're giving out scholarships at those higher programs to all those kids. And you've always been able to give out, like you said, 85 scholarships to 11.7. The reason that baseball was 11.7 is because you were giving out 85 to football if you had that program. It just made sense. So the Title IX thing is going to be weird. And I think you're right. I think some people are going to take hits. And I think the positive thing is, though, this would have been a crippling blow if the House said you have to be able to get to that 34 number. Because the reality of it is that wouldn't have made sense. They would have been contradicting themselves, not only with Title IX, but financially. Like, we've gotten to a point now where I don't know this. I can't say this for sure. This is all speculation. I hope anyone who listens to this knows that this is speculation on my part. I could be wrong. Please correct me if I am. I think colleges aren't doing as well as they were 15 years ago. I really don't. I think there are some colleges that are taking a hit. And I think financially, if they had to push to the full scholarship limit, they wouldn't. And I was saying this to you before. I would be fascinated to see a college's books. I would love to go into one school. If any school wants to open this up to me and be completely forthcoming, I would really appreciate it because I would love to see what it looks like to know what an operating budget of a college is and what giving more scholarships actually means to a college. Are we losing professors? Are we losing facility upgrades? What are we losing? What takes the hit if you give out more scholarships? Because if you're a school who can afford to go to the 34 again, this is great. This is great for every sport. If you're a school who now can max out soccer scholarships, if you're a school who can now max out, basketball, like we said, basketball, football, pretty much taken care of, but softball can now, Kendall Rogers, in that piece is talking about the Sun Belt and how they've made a big push in their diamond sports, softball and baseball. This is huge for them. They're probably going to be able to get this done and get these teams to the max things, which is going to allow them to compete, especially when you talk about that the Power 4 programs are going to have to cut 6 players. Each one of them is going to have to cut 6 players from their roster, which I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit. But now if they're trickling down to programs like the Sun Belt who are able to fulfill their full 34 scholarships, you just made the Sun Belt a whole heck of a lot better.
Yeah, and I think to go back because I do want to talk about the roster shift and how that's going to increase talent level at all levels of baseball, all the way down to Division Three. The bottom of Division Three is going to be better off now because of it, because just the trickle down effect. When we talk about the finances of colleges, we're talking about this is like you said, we don't have access to the books. We'd love to have that opportunity. We probably never will. A lot of this that worries me is going to come down to the presidents, and we know at certain universities, certain big universities, presidents understand the value of athletics, right? It's a marketing tool. They're on TV playing football, XYZ. What worries me is just hypothetically, right? This is not inside sourcing. This is not anything in general. But let's just say a school does well without athletics, right? A UNCW is my great example, right? Great school, state school, so affordable for all students across the state of North Carolina, in a great location, beautiful campus, good academics. Why do they need baseball? Like, technically, they don't need baseball at 11.7. Why do they need to sacrifice more potential revenue, right? Because that's where it is. scholarship money, you mentioned this off air. Scholarship money is technically monopoly money. It's no different than financial aid. It's no different than academic aid. It's basically like, we value you this much, so you're getting this much of a discount off of tuition. But every one scholarship we increase is 40,000, 20,000, 60,000 less in revenue for the university. So when these universities have to turn around and figure out the numbers of 11.7 to 34, they have to multiply by, 23 whatever by your tuition to figure out how much less revenue they're generating. All that's to say, let's say a president doesn't give a crap about baseball or athletics, quite frankly. They're academics all the time. They want to be a research driven university. The people come to UNCW, whether baseball's here or whether baseball's not. Who's to say they just don't go, we'll fund no scholarships and we'll go D3, right? Like, because that's what worries me about this, is that like schools are going to say, like, we have enough enrollment without athletics. Why do we need baseball? We don't have football. We don't have these big sports, and we still do fine as a university. That's what concerns me, where we're at a crossroads here where it's going to be easy for LSU to do this, to pony up and do this. But for a school that doesn't necessarily need athletics because it's not a revenue generator, this is Division II, but both you and I know a program specifically that would get mad the further the program played, because you're costing the school more money. You don't bring in revenue for your sport, so they would get frustrated that they would have to fund that. That's what concerns me, because presidents aren't athletic directors at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think a couple of things have to go into it. I think that, athletics at the end of the day is marketing and branding, right? Because it gets more people wearing your logo, which is always a positive. Yeah. The students that just go there for academics and aren't athletes, they'll get the hoodies from the bookstore. But when you start to bring athletics into it, you're talking about, people just wearing that, and that is branding. And that's always a good thing for your school. You can never have enough, you're paying for marketing, you're paying for branding essentially when you fund that. Now, I think the case in which they're like, well, we don't need any, we'll just drop down to D3 is going to be few and far between. Like, that might happen. I don't even know if we'll see any cases of it, maybe one. If you're a school like UNC Wilmington, I think one of the positive...
Like, I think a lot of NEC programs might head in that route direction.
Potentially, but the weird thing about the NEC is it's a lot of programs that, like, how many of those programs just jumped up to Division I? True. You're now adding another one this year. Like, Mercyhurst is now heading to the NEC from the Division II PSAC this year. So it's like, that one's going to be weird. That conference is weird as it is. It'll be interesting to watch it. But I think that the good thing, like, if you want to use UNCW as an example, I don't know what their scholarship limit was now. If, let's say they were operating at a full 11.7. Stay at 11.7. I think it would be beneficial for you to stay at 11.7, because I think the reality that we need to face here, and it was mentioned in that Kendall Rogers article, and it's true, and I think you and I both know this, not every school is out to win national championships. They're not. Mm-hmm. They're not out to win national championships. And I think that's okay. I really do. I hate to be that person. I know that if you're within that program, your goal should be to win, and you should be trying to win, but if you're sitting in the president's office and you're sitting on the board of a university, if you don't care if your athletics wins, that's fine, because, again, you're getting marketing from it, and you're still giving kids opportunities to go to college. You're still giving kids opportunities to play sport in college, which I think is very valuable. Now, I would love to give everyone who gets recruited to play a sport a full scholarship, but I don't sit in those meetings. I don't have that kind of power. But if you're a school like UNC Wilmington and you want to stay at 11 scholarships, 12 scholarships, maybe you can find a way to bump it to 15, I still think you're doing okay and you're doing a good job. And yeah, that makes it a little bit tougher on the coaches to recruit. And maybe you don't compete at the level that you dream of. But that's just kind of the reality of the situation. I mean, we live in a capitalist society here. Not everybody has the same things. Not everybody, we're all operating on different playing fields in our normal life. And that's... It's no different in college athletics, right? It's no different in professional athletics, right? The Milwaukee Brewers and their fans would love to spend as much as the New York Yankees and the Philadelphia Phillies, but their ownership doesn't have the money that they do. They don't generate the revenue that those teams do, so you can't spend that much, and that's just kind of life, I guess.
Yeah, what'll be fascinating is, and I read this as well recently as people have discussed this, is conferences stepping in and putting like restrictions on so that not one school like a Liberty can't go for 34 and then another school in the conference can't just sit at 11.7. Like we have to find a middle ground to at least find competitive balance in the conferences. But again, the point like is kind of the same thing that like if the school's willing to fund it, let them fund it, right? But I think we're going to see a divide because really it's just going to come down to how much your administration's willing to allow you to work, how much they see the value in it, how much they see the more like what do they define as a marketing, budget for baseball and athletics. Like all of these are factors into it, but it'll be fascinating to see if conferences step in and say, hey, let's say SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12, 34, right, is your cap. Let's say the Sun Belt, 34. Sounds like they want to really invest. Let's say CAA programs are a little reluctant. They cap it at 25 and see if there's like a way to keep it kind of equal across the conference.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you this maybe when we got a little later on, but you brought it up, so I ask now because I think the ecosystem of college athletics is kind of fascinating if you peel back the layers a little bit, because now we have the government who's making decisions, right? They're making NIL decisions, they're making scholarship decisions. Then you have to go through the NCAA, who now is supposed to set guidelines, right? Then within the NCAA, you now have conferences, conference commissioners, and the schools, that make up that conference have to make their own set of guidelines. Then you have the athletic directors at each of those schools having to make decisions. They answer to the presidents of these schools. So like you just have this continuous, like there's so many levels that it has to get to. So like you said, like we've seen the House go ahead and say everybody can get a scholarship. The NCAA says, yeah, okay, here's the limit, 34. This is what we're going to settle at. Then you have, Greg Sankey from the SEC who's like, well, we're going to go all in, and these are our schools. We believe in athletics because this is the Southeast Conference, and there's nothing to do in Starkville, Mississippi, but go to Mississippi State sporting events. Yeah. So we can do this. So we're going to push this. And the athletic director at Mississippi State's like, yeah, this is our economy in Starkville. This is what we're going to do. It's so different for everyone that everyone's operating on different playing fields. That's what's going to make this thing interesting. So let me ask you this. Do you think that a rule like this and some of these rules will cause more conference realignment? Because you mentioned Liberty, and Liberty's in the Conference USA. Liberty operates differently than every other Conference USA school. And really in football, right? Like the resources they have for football is a whole heck of a lot different than every other Conference USA program. So it's like, could this potentially drive more realignment?
I think at the mid-major level, yes. Like I was actually thinking about that, about not necessarily any program in general, but Liberty's a great example because they just lost head coach Scott Jackson, and we were lucky enough to be, hanging out with some people that are pretty high up in Division I baseball, and it's basically the consensus was, yeah, I mean, get on the boat or get left behind, right? Was kind of the feel of why Scott Jackson probably left Liberty to go back to UNC, where he had spent time as an assistant for a long time, but Liberty is like the one program that I'm like, they actually believe in this like monopoly money structure of athletics, of like, we need athletics, we're going to invest in athletics, we have, Boku Bucks and things like that. Like, could we see them divert into another conference that wants to fund it fully, right? I think they're definitely going to be going to 105 in football, right? I would be surprised if they wouldn't go to 34 in baseball as well, because this is a program specifically in an athletic department that sees the value in it. And does that mean we blink and Liberty's in the ACC? Like, I wouldn't be surprised, just because if the Conference USA comes in and there's schools that are fighting to keep this like limited, Liberty's going to be the one, program like and shocker belief system of that university to begin with. No, we have the money. We need to be the top. We need to spend more, right? We're willing to spend it. Of course, we're not, getting held back by the rest of you guys. The irony and all of that. They might have to make a move. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some programs that are willing to push these numbers now looking for strategies to get into conferences that are going to be more in line with what their goals are, right? And trying to find those opportunities.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things because, like, yeah, I mean, and the ACC could be taking a hit. It's just there's so much when you start talking on the level of college athletics on the whole and like the health of it and the structure of it. There's so many different avenues and webs, and again, it's because there's a million different decision makers. And when you start talking about specifics, like the trickle down effect is crazy, and like so
Yes.
if the ACC loses Florida State and Clemson, and Liberty's sitting there upset with Conference USA, then yeah, why wouldn't the ACC go and pluck Liberty? It's in Virginia. It would be the third school in Virginia in the conference. It just kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
And I mean, it'll be interesting and fascinating to see how private schools like Northwestern, like, don't be surprised if Northwestern's out there hacking it at Division III baseball by 2030. Like, don't be shocked, right? Like, I'm just like just calling it there. Like, Division III is notorious. There's schools that are on the level of Northwestern, like Johns Hopkins, like, all these high academic programs and schools that are Division III universities, and they're able to recruit nationally and compete for national championships just because of the value of the education that they get. Northwestern could be heading in that direction, and who the heck knows what it looks like beyond that from private school standpoints. Because, like, part of me says this helps private schools, right? Because technically now, you're able to, I mean, they've always been able to go get any athlete, but if a school like Vanderbilt's willing to go anywhere, like, same tuition, they can throw full scholarships at guys. The affordability. Wake Forest is a good example of a program that doesn't package well academically. Now they can go grab a guy and say, bang, here's your full scholarship. Let's come play ball. We got you through admissions. Just come play ball. And then you sit there and you go, well, it actually hurts them because now LSU can spread more nationally, right? LSU doesn't have to differentiate between, Louisiana kid versus Tennessee kid. Like, they don't have to, not that they ever really did, but that kid from Tennessee would have to pay a little bit more to be there. And it's just like, who the heck knows what's going to happen, who it helps, who it hurts the most. But on paper, seems good. Ton of nuance in the conversation, which I think we've highlighted. You mentioned it, so let's talk about the roster changes, right? So there's two big pieces to this new House legislation and how it changes college athletics. The scholarship thing, which on paper sounds great. We've talked about the nuances and that it's not as clean of a process there. And the other is the roster changes. And the roster changes, I think, is what's going to create more issues in college baseball to begin with. The reason why, so they lowered roster caps. We're talking about roster caps. So you cannot have over, it used to be 40. By the fall of 2025, it's going to be 34. So that means 6 players on each roster are now going to be off each roster, is the simplest way to put it. The reason this has become a thing was because they basically wanted to void, this was more of a football problem, but basically what they wanted to void was walk-ons being paid their scholarship money. So you're a preferred walk-on, but we're going to pay you $60,000 a year, which $50,000 is going to go to tuition, and then you are going to get 10,000 extra, right? Where in football that was becoming a thing, right? Oh, this guy's a walk-on, but he's not paying for tuition. So they wanted to put a scholarship and roster cap at the same point so that you couldn't manipulate the system and basically have walk-ons that are on scholarship. It's to level the playing field. So for baseball, all right, so obviously we've lowered this number. The trickle-down effect of now coaches, administrators, everybody's going to have to figure out how to get to this number of 34. We can talk about how much 34 makes sense, but obviously I went through kind of the reasoning for it. What's your thoughts in the decrease of the rosters from 40 to 34 initially?
My initial thought is which one of these programs is going to find the workaround first? Because there's going to be a workaround, whether it's developmental programs, whether
Apparently
it's
can't. Apparently not allowed.
phantom. I mean, but okay, fair
Club
enough. I
baseball
didn't
is
see that,
probably
but
your only option.
we're not allowing. Are red shirts counting against it?
Yes.
They
Red
count
shirts
against roster
and
limit as well.
yes.
So injured players, if they're on the roster, you can hold
Yes.
an injured player off your roster.
I mean, technically, you submit your roster in I'm sure the spring, and if they're not going to be, which is obviously going to be prevalent in baseball with Tommy John surgeries, is You're going to be able to take a guy as long as it's before that date is set. Now, that's another conversation. We have to figure out when those dates are going to be set. But if you have to have that number in by, let's say, for spring purposes, January 15th, and a guy gets Tommy John January 12th, he technically doesn't have to be on the roster. Now, does that mean he loses his scholarship? And
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, because if you just look at it initially, because my thought is always like, I mean, every time there's been rules in place before and people have found ways around them. So I'm sure there's going to be meetings and there's going to be avenues where they try and find a way around these things. But that's not the conversation we need to be having. 96 players are going to be off SEC rosters and need to find new homes. 84 in the schools or in the conferences that have 14 teams, which is the Big 12, and I think the ACC is 14.
ACC. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're talking. That's like the transfer portal's been crazy before. It just got like even more crowded because that's 100 players who were good enough to be on an SEC roster, or at least those programs thought they were good enough to be on SEC rosters, that are now going to be back playing at other programs, whether that's mid-majors. So now let's say they go down to a mid-major and those mid-majors now have to cut guys off their roster to let those SEC guys come in, which now means that Division II, Division III, JUCO schools, NAIA schools now have guys who were potentially on mid-major rosters aren't there anymore. So I think on the whole, this makes things better. This at least raises the floor of rosters in college baseball, raises the talent floor of rosters in college baseball, because now kids who are the 41st player on a program that might not be good enough aren't going to be there anymore. It's a shame for that kid, but it's pretty good for the talent and the overall health of the sport as far as watching the gameplay and how good these guys are. I also think that, look, it gets a little ridiculous. If 34 is the cap, I think it's good because we just talked about how some schools weren't able to carry that many guys, right? They weren't able to carry. Well, now maybe they'll get some better players because now they're at a more level playing field, because not, the schools who can max out at 40 and is a big school that's a name brand that these kids just want to go to, whether they're going to play or not initially. Now, I know more recently they've been transferring if they haven't been getting on the field. But even that 1 year where they're all stuck there, they're going to be at other programs. So I think this is good because I think that the skill level in college baseball, which we've seen continue to increase year over year, is going to get better and more spread out across the country, which can only be a positive thing.
Yeah, it's definitely going to make the talent better, right? In terms of being able to, like, again, if I was a CAA head coach, if I was a Conference USA head coach, I am fired up, right? Fired up because our level of talent is going to be better, right? Whether transfer portal or high school, because this does impact high school recruiting, because now these bigger programs have to be more selective with their spots, more selective about the guys they take. That automatically, now you're taking SEC programs, instead of taking 6 to 8, are now taking 4 to 6 on a given year. And then not to mention the guys in the program currently, whether they're injured, whether they have, they don't develop the way that those schools imagine. They're looking to fill a spot with the high level transfer portal guy, whatever it is to push that guy out and lose his scholarship. Now CAA program, Conference USA program, they're like, come on home, you can be a superstar, middle of our lineup, top of our rotation, big bullpen arm, whatever you become. We have an opportunity for you, and those guys are obviously going to be valuable, right? CAA, Conference USA coaches, they're obviously going to be fired up to welcome those guys in, right? Then obviously you lose the bottom of their roster. They go to the smaller conferences, and then, as you mentioned, the trickle down effect ensues, right? It's tough because coaches now have to make a tough decision, right, at the end of the day. Like Tracy Smith, who obviously seems like a good guy, had a lot of success at Arizona State. Now he's at Michigan. He's talking about, he's like, yeah, imagine having to have a conversation with a junior in your program who really wants a degree from Michigan and is 16 credits away, whatever it is, but you don't think he's valuable enough for that 34. What do you do? What do you do? And we're creating an avenue where, like, it's basically professionalized, right? Like, Division I baseball is now becoming professionalized rosters. And the weird part for me is, without any, like, minor league farm system for them to call up and down based off of injuries and things like that, if a really big program gets ravaged by injuries, which we've seen LSU arms go down recently, we've seen big programs struggle with injuries consistently, where are the reinforcements coming from? They're lessened. They're fewer and far between. So we're probably stretching our guys thin. But it's going to be fascinating to see, what those decision makers have to do, and what those guys that are junior seniors that didn't develop the way you had hoped now being put on the chopping block because sorry, bud, but we can't afford to keep you on scholarship, even though you want to be here. And B, we can't afford to exhaust the roster spot because now schools have to be so selective about the guys that they offer scholarships, right? We have to be more, we can't miss. And if we miss, that kid's gone the second we miss, right? It's just becoming cutthroat now. Which it was. It always has been. I'm not going to sit here and act like it hasn't always been. But, like, it's going to be more where if you miss in an evaluation and a kid's taking up a full scholarship in a roster spot, and that, let's say you've recruited a lefty arm, 89 to 91 in high school, blows out, has to drop down or something and become funky at 82, we're not dropping that kid down anymore. That kid is getting cut. Just getting cut when he doesn't develop right away. Boom, we need that roster spot for somebody else.
Yeah, and let's not act like you and I haven't heard stories of teams who have 50 guys in the fall, and then they cut it down to 40 anyway. I mean, that's that's been going on. But yeah, the second that all of this started to happen in 2020, we were starting down the path of it being more professionalized college athletics. The second you started involving more money in it, and that's the side of it that I don't think people understand. But like, again, that's how it works in the professional world. Athletics or not, like if we're going to pay you and we're going to give you these things, you have to be up to standard, and you might get fired from your job if you don't cut it. And yeah, it might be our fault for hiring you in the first place, which like bad job by us recruiting you in the first place. But I have to keep my job. I'm going to have to protect myself. I have to make this decision. I'm going to have to do this. That's just kind of the way, like as soon as we started to treat them more professionally, we were going to have to start treating them more professionally. Like the second NIL started coming and you started making money, the standards kind of changed for what was a little bit acceptable. Now there's different levels to that at all times. You can do this and be a complete scumbag about it and not care at all about the athlete and not take into account and be more selective in your recruiting and do things like, have 42 guys with the promise of potentially a scholarship and a roster spot in the fall. And then when you have to submit that roster, throw those guys that didn't do a good job out and not worry about it. Or you can just go about it differently. You're going to have to figure out the best way for your program. Like I said, everyone's going to be sitting in a different, at a different angle and see this from a different side of things. It's going to create tough decisions. And that's just, I don't feel bad for the people who have to make those tough decisions. Like, I'm sorry, Tracy Smith. Like, you got to make the tough decision. That's the rule. You've been playing at an advantage to all these other programs. Look, you and I were at Division II, Division III schools. There's tough decisions to be made there too. There's tough things that you don't have going for you that at Michigan it takes the medicine or helps the medicine go down a little bit easier. So, it's going to be interesting. I don't know how people are going to operate now, and again, the whole thing with injuries is where I get kind of caught up because I guess you're going to now have to build your roster differently. I think the thing you're going to see more of is your teams aren't going to have 4 third basemen. Can't afford it. We need
can't afford it.
Pitchers get injured too often. I need I'll teach my catcher how to play, my backup catcher, my third catcher to play third base if we run out of third baseman. I ain't putting them on the mound, right? Probably.
Resident Backside Groundballs recruiting expert said two-way players are going to become more valuable.
100%.
Like, even if it's just a guy that can come in and throw strikes in the midweek game and eat innings for you, like, you're going to see, because a lot of, let's be honest, like a lot of, Delaware is a good example, right? The starting shortstop this year, just from conversations we've had, good, really, really good high school pitcher. And it's like, but he doesn't pitch in college. It's like now that kid might not be able to just not pitch in college. Like he's going to have to continue to get where two-way players are going to become more of a commodity at this level of like, we just need a guy that like, of course, if you can be a high leverage reliever or even a starter, even more valuable, but like guys are going to have more shots to two-way in general of just like your last six pitchers probably have to be position guys at the end of the day with what this structure is in some form or fashion, just guys that like 82 in the strike zone or guys that throw 95 and spray it, like some form or fashion of guys that can come in and get reliable innings. I'm with you though, like with the injury bug, right? The other thing that we see a lot of, how many guys get shut down in the fall? You know what I'm saying? Like Jamie Arnold's a guy who's going to pitch a ton of innings up to here. How does Florida State handle the fall if we're only at 34? What do we do, right? Like, what do we do to get through fall playing games and make sure our guys get at bats where now we have 12 arms to work through the fall compared to our normal 20, right? Do we have student managers that throw 86 at Florida State, which they're probably out there at Florida State? Maybe. How do we balance that of getting guys to get through the fall, to get through the spring? Obviously, if you're ravaged by injuries, you're not going anywhere. And like that's where I think the hard cap frustrates me a little bit. Like I'd be more open to like 40 roster with 28 active, and you have to submit that active roster before every weekend, kind of like regionals and kind of like travel is at the Division 1 level. Whatever it is, I just think we're probably now putting, like, we talk about player empowerment with the scholarships, and that's a great sign. But are we talking about player injuries, which we've already seen an issue become a thing of, like, when we're talking about workload management now, that kid's going to have to throw an extra 20 pitches on a midweek because they don't have the depth now to even up 10 to put another guy in because they might need that guy on Saturday, right? Like decisions have to be made, and I feel like we're now going to be pushing players past the brink of what even is comfortable now.
Yeah, I think we need to start at, I mean, you and I can ask around. I'm curious to know how many times or how many schools, even in this past year or in a coach's tenure, have they used 34 guys?
Yeah.
Have they truly used and needed 34 guys? Because maybe you see it at the big league level, they use 26 on the active, and they use, anywhere probably to around 40 guys a year.
A lot of
40.
call-ups.
I was going to say probably 40. Yeah. You think that's fair?
Probably.
So I
fair.
wonder
They
how
play
many in college baseball
though.
use 34. Truly, because you're not playing 162 games, so you can probably get through with less. Like, I wonder if 26 is a good number. Let's just say the MLB has it right, and colleges, let's say you have your set 26 that you're using, which even feels like somewhat of a lot, maybe. But anyway, let's say you're using 26, and now you have 8 guys that, if injuries happen, those guys now have to slot into those roles. Maybe 34 is a good number with that, because we're at 40. I wonder. I can't imagine how many teams used 40 in college baseball last year. Would you say? Couldn't be many.
Probably not that many. I mean, red shirts alone aren't even red shirts and injuries alone don't even participate. So like nobody. I would be shocked if anybody was able to scratch out 40 guys.
So maybe, and I don't know. Again, this is something that I'm going to be curious. Like I don't think I've ever asked any of the coaches we've been around that question. But like I'm truly now curious, and I'm trying to think back, and I was trying to do the math in my head, but it's too jumbled of when I was coaching of how many guys we truly used in a given year. And I'm not talking about the we're up 20, down 20, let's get this guy, let's throw him a bone, because that's not a necessity. You don't have to do that. Now it's just
going to be a position player,
right? Oh, and you really don't have to do that. Like
no.
You did that to throw kids a bone to give them an opportunity.
Yeah.
You can if you don't have the room to the extra guys floating around, that you don't have to give them the opportunity. You're up 20, just keep the guys in the lineup. Don't give anybody the at bats if you don't need to, and just finish the game. So
more professionalized. Yep.
Right. It'll be interesting. I mean, it's going to be really, yeah. It's going to be, you're going to have to manage it a little bit more professionally. And again, I think it's doable because you're not playing 162. Now the pitching thing is where it gets weird. That's where it's tough to me. Yeah, but it's kind of those things that we're gonna have to wait and see. We can sit here and guess and speculate on that, but
My guess, 18 pitchers. You want to start the spring with 18 pitchers, 16 position guys, and 4 guys that are reliable two ways. And I think I'd feel confident and comfortable getting through a 56 game season each and every year with 18 arms, four guys that can do both, and then 12.
so
Some of
that
those
gives you
four could be
22 arms. You're saying with 16
22,
position player.
22
Yeah,
arms.
that's
Yeah,
I'm the pitching coach in me was yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Just
that's
because injury and also
reasonable.
like just think they're volatile and they're volatile.
Guys could look good in February, right? Like and like
Oh, you know this. Everybody looks good in the gym in January
yeah.
if you're a cold weather
Well,
team.
yeah, well that's because the lighting ain't good, and we got
That's what I'm
white
saying.
backgrounds and
Everybody
stuff
looks
like
good, so
that.
like it's hard to
Yeah,
know sometimes. Things change.
yeah, and I think that's going to be something that, like you said, I don't envy the people that have to make those decisions. I mean, that comes with the job, that comes with the territory of the program that you're running. I think I would hope that people use their conscience, but some people are going to want to win and do that. I think it does increase the talent at all levels. Again, this is another move where it's going to increase everything. I think again, the people it hurts the most are high school recruits, right? At the end of the day, like high school recruits, like you and I, when we graduated high school, not saying Division I baseball was easy to get to, right? It was easier, obviously, right? Less talent going to the major league, into professional baseball, less talent in the transfer portal. Like, it's just like, it's, as I like to say all the time, it's not your grandfather's Division I baseball. It's not, you can't just get into Division I baseball 85 to 87 with a projectable frame. Like those guys nowadays are slim pickings at Division II schools. Are like, I'm kind of fringy on him, and it's like, he doesn't throw enough strikes. It's like, it's insane to think that like talent, it feels better than ever, but guys are at a position now. It's like when we were coming through high school, if you were 85 to 87 with a projectable frame, it was like check, get them out, like D1 guy, early offer, everything like that. Now those guys are still 2025 graduates in, you know, uncommitted, right, in limbo, waiting for a Division III school to come calling. So that's, I think, where it hurts the most. But again, because of the transfer portal and everything like that, it's going to increase the talent level, and the guys that it gets rid of really are at the bottom of Division III, because there's always going to be a home for somebody. But it is fascinating to kind of see it from that aspect of how it impacts everything, because these roster changes they're massive. They're just massive on for the landscape.
Yeah, and I don't. The kids who may not have an opportunity to play college baseball anymore, I don't feel all that bad for. I guess, like, I'm sorry. Like,
No, I'm not. I'm
be
not
better.
disagreeing
Like,
with you.
it's not like it's not one of those things where everyone does deserve to play college baseball. Like,
Yeah,
and there's still going to be a ton of yeah. There's
there's
still
a
going to be a
ton
ton
of
of
schools
opportunity.
out
I'm
there.
just saying,
There
like,
are
if
a
you're
ton
not
of
good enough,
schools
you're
out
not
there.
good enough. Go to school, get a good education, do something else. Like,
And there's a ton of schools out there, right? Like at the end of the
and there's a
day,
ton
like
of there's
and there's no roster limitations on Division III programs, right? Division II programs. You could bring in 90 kids for all they care. And trust me, there's gonna be administrators that are gonna be licking their chops over what that's gonna do
there are
for them
Division II programs with
with
90 kids on
90
the roster
guys.
looking at
So
you,
there's
USC
gonna be
Aiken.
opportunities, but it's going to be one of those things that's fascinating. It's just now that D1 or bust mentality, which is probably a good thing. Like you need to close the book on that thing. Like no matter how good you are, like be open minded to every other program in the country before you even get to the point of having a conversation. And if a Division I comes calling, just be grateful and lucky, because I mean at the end of the day, like I said this to Sam the other day, it's like it's becoming professionalized. It was already selective to be Division I athlete. Now it's just even more. Like you have to be really good to find a Division I opportunity. Like really good. Like we're talking about like talented with some tools and an opportunity to be a really good baseball player, and it's going to be even harder. You have to stand out and do something spectacular in each and every way, and it's just, do you think you would have been recruited to play Division I baseball in this landscape? I guess that's my next question.
Absolutely not. Absolutely. I mean, God, no, man. Absolutely not. Goodness gracious. Goodness
Uh,
gracious, no. Please.
well,
First off,
eh,
I just, I'm going to upset people. Never mind.
are you sure?
No, I would not have been.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Or
It's
someone's
just
not doing a good job. Whoever that coach was that was giving me an opportunity. And if it was today's landscape and they were coming after me, then those guys on that coaching staff need to check their evaluation skills.
well, and like even I say that at Division 3, right? When I was playing, top arms were 82 to 84, right? Like 82 to 84, you'd see the occasional upper 80s, whatever. By the time I was coaching, which again, for those that don't know the timeline of my life, not that long after, 2 years after I was playing, every staff had a guy who was 88 to 90. Every staff. Like you'd go to play the worst team in the conference, a team that would lose games all year 20 to nothing, like consistently. And they'd roll out some bullpen arm and he's like 90. And you're like, yeah, he can't find the strike zone. Of course not. But like he's throwing 90, like, and you're just like, what is this? Like you can't. And then every level, obviously, it goes up from there. But like just how Division 3 has changed in a small window. I'm sure it's even different now. I haven't been around the Division 3 game enough to know. But like guys are just better. Like just flat out, guys are better. Like it way better. It doesn't.
At
It
all
doesn't
levels.
even at all levels. Like it just the level playing field is unbelievable. The stuff is better. That the athletes are better than ever. The skills are just unbelievable. I mean, we see it with guys that have made it to campus, and it's special talents that we're able to watch in Omaha and all the way through. But the guys that make it to campus, like it's crazy to think about.
There was guys on my staff when I was coaching who would ask, like, would you have been? And I'd be like, almost all you guys are better than I was. Like, almost all of you are. Your stuff is way better than mine.
I wouldn't
So
I wouldn't get a hit against you like at
that
this
was
level
yeah
anymore.
that was
No.
the Division 2 level. So Division 1, yeah, no, I don't think I would have been in.
Yeah, of course. So,
Again, there's
any
more to
closing
that thought,
thoughts?
but
Yeah, so I was thinking about it and I had to put you on like that. But any closing thoughts before we get out of here? This will probably come out on Tuesday, so just be on the lookout. But any closing thoughts?
no, I mean, I think this is positive. I think it's exciting. I do think that college baseball is in a good spot. Don't listen. If you're a fan out there not knowing how to feel about all these changes, I think these, for the most part, on the surface level, things are good. Don't listen to the doomsday people, because the doomsday people only look at I feel like a snapshot of things.
Yeah.
Like Division 2 baseball, Division 3, like college baseball on the whole, I think is healthy.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think the sport is heading in the right direction. We just had a historic Omaha in terms of viewership and people watching. So, it's in good hands and it seems like it's going to continue to head in a positive direction with the increase in talent and everything and the increase in commitment, care, and everything like that. As I always like to say, it's good for the podcast. We'll see if it's good for the overall health of the sport. But it seems like anyway, we're going to a professional model in college athletics, and baseball is just brought along for the ride. So it'll be interesting to see what the next 5 years holds for college baseball. But that'll do for this episode of the Backside Groundballs podcast. Make sure you are subscribing to the YouTube channel, Backside Groundballs Media. Make sure you are following on all podcast platforms, including Apple Pods, Spotify, and anywhere you find your podcast. We post episodes weekly. Let's just throw weekly out there. We've been kind of inconsistent in what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to balance all the stuff we're trying to do. So make sure you're always checking it out. So smash that subscribe button so that you get the alert when these hit your feed. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at BacksideGB, Instagram at Backside Groundballs, and TikTok at Backside Groundball. And most importantly, make sure you're sharing with 5 friends. And we'll see you next time on the Backside Groundballs podcast.